Ici, c'est la manif pour tous.
Il n'y a plus ce soir ni gauche ni droite.
La manif de tous les citoyens
qui veulent défendre les plus faibles.
Tous les homosexuels ne sont pas pour ce projet de loi.
Jusqu'à maintenant, nous tous, nous sommes issus tous d'un homme et d'une femme. Et ce repère de la filiation extrêmement précieux, nous voulons qu'il soit transmis aux générations futures.
C'est un souhait du gouvernement, évidemment, d'adopter cette ouverture de la procréation médicalement assistée.
Ce test ne donne pas une liberté supplémentaire, il fragilise.
Nous ne voulons pas que l'on sacrifie notre identité à la mode du moment.
On nous dit que les mœurs évoluent, que la société change, mais nos besoins à nous, petits enfants de l'orphelinat, ne changent pas.
Je serai le président de tous.
Président de la République, de la démocratie participative.
Vous pouvez ignorer cette foule qui se lève contre le projet de loi instaurant une nouvelle filiation.
Homme issu d'un peuple opprimé, réduit à l'esclavage, où le mariage était interdit et fut une conquête de la liberté, j'affirme le droit à l'égalité dans la différence et non dans le même, le semblable, l'unique.
Thousands of protesters against gay marriage have filled the streets of Paris. Activists have mobilised a mass demonstration against the French government's plans to legalise homosexual marriages and adoptions. There's no reason for two men or two women to marry. Civil unions were introduced 10 years ago. There's no reason to change things. Where I have questions is regarding adoption. I wouldn't want children to be lied to over adoption. For me, a child should have a father and a mother.
The French president says that he won't change his mind, but he should still listen to the people who don't share his point of view. For such an important social change, there should be a much larger majority of people who really want a significant change in society.
They're calling for a referendum to poll people on how they feel about same-sex civil marriages and rights for gay couples to conceive and adopt children.
I want a referendum. I don't understand how, over a matter like this, we're looking to force through a law quickly. People are worried, French are expressing that.
To do with any particular religion. When you get married, you make a commitment to society, to love each other, to protect each other, and there's a clear link between marriage and procreation. Two men or two women can love each other, but they will never make children.
It's the prospect of gay people being able to adopt children that has motivated so many people to protest. The movement has brought together conservatives, right-wingers, and people from Christian, Jewish and Muslim communities.
There are some homosexuals who are in this march as well. I think one has to say that they're probably a minority among the homosexual community, but there are among the ranks of the marchers people who believe that marriage is not something which homosexuals need, particularly because there are other ways of pursuing their rights to protection in couples and so on.
Changing the traditional French family means weakening the very foundations of the country. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera, Paris.
We were asking for marriage in the 1990s, and we haven't gotten it yet. We just got a sous mariage, which is the Pax, and this is unacceptable to us because we still don't have the same rights as straight people, and we don't think this is fair.
I agree. It's a no-brainer that we should have the right to marry, but I also think equally that it's a no-brainer that the institution of marriage should not exist. So that causes my brain some trouble, and part of it, why it causes me trouble, is because fighting for gay marriage generally involves lying about what we're going to do with marriage when we get there. because we lie that the institution of marriage is not going to change. And that is a lie. The institution of marriage is going to change, and it should change. And again, I don't think it should exist. I don't like taking part in creating fictions about my life. That's sort of not what I had in mind when I came out 30 years ago. I have 3 kids who have 5 parents, more or less. And I don't see why they shouldn't have 5 parents legally. I don't see why we should choose 2 of those parents and make them into a sanctioned couple. And because between those 5 parents we have 2 groups with 2 different citizenships,
you might
2 groups of 3.
You might need to take us through that. You might need to take us through that because we're getting a bit confused.
It would take a long time. No, I have.
You got married in Massachusetts?
I got married in Massachusetts to my partner, who's Russian, my ex-partner. And by that time we had 2 kids, one of whom was adopted and one of whom I gave birth to. We broke up a couple of years after that. And a couple of years after that I met my new partner. And she has just had a baby. And that baby's biological father is my brother. My daughter's biological father is a man who lives in Russia. And my adopted son also considers him his father. So the 5 parents break down into 2 groups of 3 who have 2 different citizenships. That's not very British. And really, I would like to live in a legal system that is capable of reflecting that reality. And I don't think that's compatible with the institution of marriage.
Many people still don't think same-sex marriage will affect them.
I even put this concern to the chairman at the time of the school committee. A little girl saying, "I love my girlfriend, I must be gay." And he said, "David, I have no problem with that whatsoever."
In our new documentary, The Problem with Same-Sex Marriage, we sent our crews out to document the impact of same-sex marriage. You'll be surprised by what we found.
The little black book, Queer in the 21st Century, it tells kids how to perform homosexual sex acts.
Here we have government officials directly attacking a major world religion for its doctrinal teaching.
The president is being hypocritical in his stances. He is defending his federal health care law in court, and yet DOMA has been upheld 4 times in federal court, and yet he's decided it doesn't deserve to be defended.
The words carved in stone above the entrance to the United States Supreme Court say equal justice under law. But since the court issued its Roe v. Wade ruling in 1973, justice for 50 million Americans is forever lost. Hello, my name is Tony Perkins. The United States Supreme Court is across the street from the U.S. Capitol here in Washington, D.C. Laws passed on that side of the street can be changed every 2 years when citizens vote in a new Congress. But decisions made on this side of the street in the United States Supreme Court are far more permanent. Roe v. Wade is but one example. We're still living with the incredible cost of that infamous Supreme Court decision. But I'm not here today to plead with you for the lives of the unborn, even though that would be a very worthy cause. I'm here today to show you the impact of same-sex marriage on your sons and daughters. Same-sex marriage is currently recognized in 5 states. Meanwhile, 30 states have enacted constitutional amendments that define marriage as a union of one man and one woman. But that could all change based upon what the Supreme Court decides.
I think it's very likely that the Defense of Marriage Act is going to end up before the U.S. Supreme Court.
Federal DOMA, or the Federal Defense of Marriage Act, was enacted in 1996 by an overwhelming margin in Congress. Signed into law by President Clinton, has now been the law of the land for 15+ years. This law defines marriage for all purposes under federal law, which we know there are 1,100+ places in federal law where marriage intersects with federal law. Defines marriage as the union of one man and one woman. But this is being challenged by advocates who want same-sex marriage.
DOMA not only had a setback in a recent court case, it also lost its primary defender.
The Attorney General wrote a letter to members of Congress stating that they, meaning the Department of Justice, was no longer going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in court. They based this on their view that it was unconstitutional.
It's not up to the President of the United States to determine if something is constitutional or not. That's what we have the courts for. And so he ought to defend the law and let the courts decide on any constitutionality.
The basis that they're using to attack this statute is that there is some sort of, quote, right in the Constitution to homosexual marriage. Well, if that right exists, then that's in the federal Constitution. It now completely trumps every state law, every state constitution, and essentially what they will have done is forced same-sex marriage on the entire country without anybody even having the right to vote on it.
I was offended because it is the job of the President. The President of the United States takes an oath of office to uphold the laws of the nation, and it is the rule of law that separates us from some of the regimes across the world where you have so much lawlessness.
The President is being hypocritical in his stances, where on the one hand he is defending his federal health care law in court, even though there have been 2 federal judges that have ruled it unconstitutional, and yet DOMA has been upheld 4 times in federal court, and yet he's decided it doesn't deserve to be defended and has instructed his Justice Department to not defend it anymore. It doesn't make any sense at all.
The Defense of Marriage Act, known also as DOMA, defines marriage for federal purposes as the union of one man and one woman. The law also prevents one state from imposing same-sex marriage on another state. The law is currently being challenged in at least 10 pending cases across the nation. One will most likely find its way to the Supreme Court very soon. The outcome of that case could change the definition of marriage nationwide forever. In 2003, when the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts mandated same-sex marriage, there was no way to know the full impact of that decision. But today, more than 8 years later, there is clear evidence showing the problems associated with same-sex marriage.
We in Massachusetts have had same-sex marriage forced upon us for 7 years now. And the first level of impact is in our schools. From kindergarten through 12th grade and beyond, our children are being indoctrinated on same-sex marriage and the rightness, the correctness of homosexuality.
The beginning of 2005, our son Jacob was going into kindergarten, and he came home with a diversity book bag. And in the diversity book bag was a book entitled Who's in a Family by Robert Scutch, and that introduces children to same-sex households.
Back in March of this year, our son came home Friday afternoon and bounded in the front door and said, "Mom, Dad, guess what? Our teacher read us the funniest book. It was so silly. It was about a prince who was getting married, but he didn't marry a princess. He married a prince." That afternoon, we sent the teacher an email message. The teacher called back and said that yes, it was a book about 2 princes who got married. King and King. It's a story that introduces the idea of men having a romantic relationship and getting married. We were shocked.
And your son is how old?
He's 7 years old, in 2nd grade.
And they read this book to him?
Yes, in the formal classroom setting with this teacher as an authority figure presenting this concept as something that is good and right and the way things should be.
After the diversity book bag came home, we realized that the intention of the administrators and teachers was to affirm these relationships and gay marriage in the minds of children. When we went into the school, what we requested is parental notification when these issues are brought up by adults within the school, and the option to opt our child out of this type of indoctrination.
And then she said, well, she had checked with the administrators and they had said that this was not a parental notification issue.
One of the reasons they give is they said same-sex marriage is legal in Massachusetts. Therefore, we can broach it any time with your child.
So when she would not acknowledge our parental rights in this area, we then went to our Judeo-Christian beliefs and our faith and said, well, you wish to affirm homosexuality to our son. You're presenting that which is sin as though it is not to our son, and we cannot allow that.
To make a long story short, the accommodation they gave was to put me in handcuffs and send me to jail. And they were willing to handcuff a father and send him to jail. It was a 6x8 cell, filthy. But, you know, I felt I didn't have a choice at that point in order to fulfill my role and duty as a father.
So we filed a lawsuit. Long story short, the district court said that they didn't think we have a parental right to be notified in this.
The federal court judge Mark Wolf ruled to dismiss our case. Every citizen should take the time to go read his judgment. He spoke about this book, Changing Minds, in which, to paraphrase, he believes that it's the school's job to change the minds of the young children, that they are indeed young and impressionable.
So it's translating directly into what the courts did on gay marriage, and then teaching the children it's okay. And in fact, you could be gay too. I even put this concern to the chairman at the time of the school committee. A little girl saying, I love my girlfriend, I must be gay. And he said, David, I have no problem with that whatsoever, about children being told this and thinking they're gay at a very early age.
One mother shared with me how she and her son were out doing yard work, and a neighborhood child came up and asked at the age of 6 or 7 years old if it was all right for this little boy to marry her son when he grew up. And the mother was aghast and said, well, no, of course not. That wouldn't be right. And the little boy said, oh, yes, in Massachusetts, I can marry a man when I grow up.
Children and teenagers are at a time in life where they're still figuring out who they are and what they like, and their identity is still evolving. And so when they begin to label themselves as homosexual, gay, or lesbian, bisexual, when they adopt those labels at a time in life when they're still evolving, that can have the effect of closing out other options for themselves.
My name is Brian Kamaker. I'm president of Mass Resistance, pro-family group in Massachusetts. Here's an example of something that was that was at Brookline High, the little black book, Queer in the 21st Century. This was picked up at Brookline High School at a gathering of teachers and kids pushing the gay agenda at that school. This is so disgusting that I can't really read it to you. It tells kids how to safely perform a variety of homosexual sex acts. It tells where you can meet other kids who are homosexual or homosexual men. It was published by the AIDS Action Committee with money, as it says, from the Boston Department of Health, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, and other groups that get public money. The Holy Grail is same-sex marriage is legal, therefore you can't stop us from talking about it. For almost 20 years, we've been fighting for parental rights in the schools and pro-family values. Anyone who thinks that same-sex marriage is a benign eccentricity which won't affect the average person should consider what it has done to Massachusetts since 2004. It's been used as a hammer to force everyone to accept homosexuality. New radical demands never cease. On November 18, 2003, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court announced its Goodridge opinion, declaring that it was unconstitutional not to allow same-sex marriage. 6 months later, despite public outrage, homosexual weddings began to take place, and that was just the beginning. Almost immediately after the gay marriage ruling in Massachusetts, things started happening in high schools across the state. Starting in early December of 2003, there were school-wide assemblies to celebrate same-sex marriage. Kids were given literature from national homosexual groups, telling them how it was now to be considered a normal part of society. Children in schools were given this sheet on marriage myths by the homosexual group Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders. One of their myths is that the purpose of marriage is procreation. Another myth is that children are better off when raised by a mother and a father. And lots of other things were handed out. Within months, it was brought into the middle schools. An exhibit called Love Makes a Family, meant to normalize the concept of homosexual marriage in kids' minds, was going through schools across the state. In September of 2004, an 8th grade teacher in Brookline, Massachusetts, told National Public Radio that the gay marriage ruling had opened up the door to teaching homosexuality in her class. She told NPR, "Give me a break. It's legal now." The following year, it was in elementary school curricula, with hostility toward parents who disagreed. Kindergarteners in Lexington, Massachusetts, were given copies of a picture book, Who's in a Family, telling them that same-sex couples are just another kind of family, just like their own parents. The book made a point of showing 2 mothers and 2 fathers to the children. The next year, 2nd graders at the same school were read a book, King and King, about 2 men who fall in love and marry each other, ending with a picture of them kissing. When parents Rob and Robin Worthland complained, they were told that the school had no obligation to notify them or allow them to opt their child out. So the Parkers and the Worthlands filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the town and the school system. Parents rallied to their side, but in 2007, a panel of federal judges ruled that because same-sex marriage is legal in Massachusetts, schools actually have a duty to normalize homosexual relationships to children, and schools have no obligation to notify parents or let them opt out their children, even in elementary school. In fact, according to the court's ruling, acceptance of homosexuality is now a matter of good citizenship. School libraries have also radically changed, from elementary school to high school, with books normalizing homosexual marriage. Activist teachers began displaying photos of their same-sex spouses in their classrooms and bringing their same-sex spouses to school functions. And when an attempt at a constitutional amendment to stop same-sex marriage began gathering steam, there was a full-court press on students to actively support same-sex marriage. Kids in school were even persuaded to march in gay pride parades with pro-same-sex marriage banners. And there's more. People can get fired from their jobs for expressing religious objections to same-sex marriage. In 2009, an employee of a Boston business was fired for mentioning his disagreement with same-sex marriage after another employee brought it up. It even made the local TV news. His letter of termination said that his comment was inappropriate because, quote, in Massachusetts, same-sex marriage is legal. And of course, the wedding industry is required to serve the homosexual community if requested. Wedding photographers, halls, caterers, etc. must accept same-sex marriage events or be held liable for discrimination. Businesses are often tested for tolerance by homosexual activists. The activists will go into restaurants or bars and publicly kiss and fondle each other to test whether the establishment demonstrates sufficient equality. And if not, the businesses can be fined and punished. Increasingly, lawyers in Massachusetts firms practicing family law must now attend seminars on homosexual marriage. In addition, there are now several homosexual judges overseeing the Massachusetts family courts. One of the first shocking changes was to the marriage license itself. It doesn't say husband and wife anymore. It now says Party A and Party B. And the state's justices of the peace were ordered to perform same-sex marriages when requested, despite religious objections they may have. Some were forced to resign rather than comply. A climate of fear has kept politicians at all levels from disagreeing with or criticizing the homosexual movement since same-sex marriage came to Massachusetts. Public officials are afraid of being accused of wanting to, quote, take away rights, and this fear has expanded to suppress any meaningful debate on all homosexual-related issues. Additionally, it has brought a feeling of intimidation among pro-family people across the state. In recent years, the numbers of politicians and political candidates marching in the Gay Pride Parade is staggering. Every year in Boston, at the beginning of Gay Pride Week, members of the City Council gather in front of City Hall and pay their respects to the homosexual rainbow flag, which then flies over Boston City Hall for the entire week. And now even some Republicans march in the Gay Pride parades. All of this has had a huge effect on state government. Within a year of the gay marriage ruling in Massachusetts, the state's adoption and foster care workers went through a massive indoctrination on, quote, LGBT youth awareness. These sessions were run by the radical National Gay and Lesbian Task Force. The emphasis was that those working with children must be trained that homosexuality and transgenderism are normal. In 2006, the Parents of the Year honored by the Massachusetts Department of Social Services were two men who were married to each other. The men had adopted a baby through the state, against the wishes of the baby's parents, by the way, according to news reports. And the day after that adoption was final, the state approached the men about adopting a second child. The state-funded Massachusetts Adoption Resource Exchange, whose logo includes two men with a child, has been pushing GLBT family formation and holds adoption parties where homosexual couples can come and see available children in person. Birth certificates in Massachusetts have been changed from mother and father to mother/first parent and father/second parent. Two men or two women can now be listed as the parents on birth certificates. Homosexuals who adopt can revise children's existing birth certificates. Adoption agencies have said that well over 40% of their adoptions are to homosexual couples. Anecdotal reports also indicate that many adoption agencies now favor homosexuals over normal couples. And it's getting even more radical. On May 15, 2013, a representative of the Massachusetts Department of Children and Families told that they are weeding out adoptive and foster parents who are not willing to wholly accept and support GLBT self-identification by a child in their care. Any church or religious group that dares to deny the legitimacy of same-sex marriage, even inside its walls, can face a wave of terror and harassment. In 2005, the Tremont Temple Baptist Church in downtown Boston held a religious conference on issues surrounding homosexuality and gay marriage. Over 100 homosexual activists came to storm the church, using bullhorns and screaming obscene slogans. Boston riot police had to keep them from entering. They even dragged a coffin to the front door. In 2006, the same church held a televised pro-traditional marriage event inside. Homosexual activists carrying this banner and other signs taunted and screamed at people entering and leaving. That same year, a Catholic group held a pro-traditional marriage rally in downtown Worcester, Massachusetts. They had hardly begun the speeches when homosexual activists swarmed the area, yelling, "Bigots!" and screaming disgusting chants. When one of the rioters rushed the stage, an organizer tried to lead her away. The rioter sued him for assault. He went through a 4-day trial before being acquitted by a jury. In 2012, a Catholic church in Acushnet, Massachusetts, posted the words, "Two men are friends, not spouses," on its outdoor sign. Over the next day, the church received a flood of profane phone calls, including a threat to burn down the building. Then, at the Sunday Mass, homosexual activists gathered outside the church to harass and intimidate the parishioners. In 2013, homosexual activists targeted Pastor Scott Lively, who had preached against the homosexual movement in his sermons and writings. Pastor Lively had recently opened a religious mission and coffee house in inner-city Springfield, Massachusetts. A group of homosexual Occupy activists came and terrorized the people in the building. In all of these incidents, to our knowledge, the local police made no efforts to arrest the perpetrators or charge them with any crimes, though in the majority of the situations there were police officers at the scene or nearby. In fact, in our observations, the police were largely sympathetic to the homosexual activists. This is what you can expect with gay marriage becoming official policy. The homosexual movement has had its plans in place for many years. Gay marriage was just a starting point. In 2003, before the gay marriage court decision in Massachusetts, the prominent Boston Gay and Lesbian Advocates and Defenders Legal Group passed this brochure out at a homosexual event, outlining their long-term action plans. At the top is marriage, and then their objectives include LGBT youth, Boy Scouts, transgender equality, law enforcement, immigration, and the military, among others. As we saw earlier, to them it all starts with same-sex marriage. In addition, they are continuing the aggressive push to normalize homosexuality in the schools, and it's having chilling results. A government survey of high school students across Massachusetts showed that the percentage identifying as gay and who had same-sex physical contact rose by about 50% between 2005 and 2009. What comes next? The major theme now in Massachusetts is transcending sexual boundaries, and it's going in all directions. Polygamy is no longer an exotic concept, but is being mainstreamed wherever possible. Recently, the governor of Hawaii even admitted that if gay marriage passes there, a polygamy lawsuit by the homosexual movement will probably be next. Sadomasochism is also being mainstreamed by the homosexual movement. Almost every gay pride parade now has a contingent promoting leather and consensual infliction of pain. Not too long ago, cross-dressing was a fringe behavior. Now, the transgender rights movement is celebrated at the highest levels of state government. Men not only dress as women, but get medical procedures to look like women and march in the streets for transgender rights. But as we see over and over, the movement's major focus is on children. Here is a man at a Youth Pride event in downtown Boston. A few years ago, Fox News interviewed us about a gruesome discovery at the world-renowned Children's Hospital in Boston. The two kids in this photo from the Boston Globe were identical twin boys. One of them decided to become a girl. The hospital has set up a gender change clinic for pre-adolescent children to be given hormones and drugs to delay puberty, including growth in height, in order to facilitate body-mutilating operations later on to supposedly change their sex. It's being celebrated in the media. And just this year, the State Department of Education issued a directive to schools across the state that boys who decide to dress as girls should be able to use girls' restrooms, play on girls' sports teams, and be addressed by a girl's name, without the parents' knowledge or consent. And other students or staff who don't agree must be disciplined or given diversity training. That is the brave new world in Massachusetts since gay marriage began. As we've shown you, the slippery slope is real. Once same-sex marriage gets a foothold, society becomes more oppressive, hammering citizens with the force of law. The judicial system becomes more radical and arrogant, and politicians become more cowardly. And once that concept is institutionalized, other boundaries on sexual behaviors quickly begin to fall. It's interesting that you hear a lot about civil rights and equality, but in fact, many true civil rights begin to disappear, and people holding traditional values become second-class citizens under the law. The push for gay marriage is really about putting the legal stamp of approval on homosexuality and forcing its acceptance on otherwise unwilling citizens and on our social, political, and commercial institutions. To those of you where this is being threatened, do not wait. It is absolutely necessary to call, write, and even visit your elected officials. They must feel your outrage before it's too late. Thank you.
We're looking at the problems with same-sex marriage, how it becomes a legal platform for exposing our children to homosexual material. We've seen the problems with introducing elementary school kids to same-sex marriage and how same-sex marriage inevitably undermines parental rights. Now let's look at another problem, the incredible impact on at-risk children who are placed in same-sex households.
Sometimes homosexual activists will argue that children raised by homosexual parents are no different from children raised by heterosexual parents. Unfortunately, the evidence simply does not support that. And there was a study conducted recently which looked at the family histories of 262 children raised by homosexual fathers or lesbian mothers. And it found that the percentages of children of homosexual parents who themselves became something other than heterosexual, gay, lesbian, bisexual, or unsure of their sexual orientation, ranged from 16% of those children to as high as 57% of those children. Daughters of lesbian mothers had the highest rates, anywhere from 33 to 57%. Just to understand, the percentage of the total American population that identify themselves as either homosexual or bisexual was 3.5%, according to a very recent study. If you want to talk about the ratio, it's somewhere from 5 to 15 times as likely to be homosexual or bisexual as the general population. Children raised by homosexual parents turn out very differently from children raised by heterosexual parents.
We've looked at several ways same-sex marriage harms our children. Now let's look at another type of problem with it. Believe it or not, all Americans already have equal rights guaranteed by our Constitution. And it's no accident that our founders in the First Amendment put religious freedom first, before free speech, before freedom of the press, and even before our right to assemble to present our grievances.
When we look at the impact of same-sex marriage on free speech, this is a cognate of religious liberty. The first liberty in the First Amendment is religious liberty. Unless we're free to believe what we believe, we cannot speak it. That's the freedom of speech. We cannot publish it. That's the freedom of the press. We cannot assemble on its basis, the freedom of assembly. And we cannot challenge the government. That's the freedom of the redress of grievances. So religious liberty is the big one. If you don't have that, you have no other liberties. And so it ultimately is a theological issue between a sexuality given by the God of Genesis 1 and 2, the one true creator, or any other idea outside the Bible.
The important thing is that for those of us who don't want to self-identify as gay, whose same-sex attractions are unwanted, we now have to fight for our right to seek out this kind of help. For example, recently, Julia Ward at Eastern Michigan University was removed from the graduate program when she, as a Christian, said that in good conscience she could not give counseling to a gay couple. She talked to her supervisor in her program, and the supervisor said, well, just assign them another counselor in training. And so that's what happened. And unless she signs on the dotted line of a particular ideology regarding same-sex attraction, she can't get her education.
Legal experts agree that religious freedom and same-sex marriage cannot coexist. One big problem with same-sex marriage is that it reinforces false assumptions that are all over the internet and in the media. How many times have you read or heard that change is not possible for homosexuals? In fact, those same people will say that change is even harmful and should not be attempted.
This is a deeply personal subject to me because I not only work with men who are in conflict over their homosexuality, I have been a man in conflict with his homosexuality and know very well what it's like to reach a point of saying, Lord, I have this condition, I did not ask for it, but I don't know what to do about it. Where do I go from here?
My name is Joanne Hiley, and I definitely had problems with lesbianism for 10 years of my life, ages 13 to 23. And I did have complete freedom from homosexuality. I had no desire for any woman. I was crazy about my husband. Over the 33 years that I've been counseling people, I've actually counseled one-to-one around 1,500 people. I just rejoice in God and in His power to set people free from homosexuality. So, you know, they can say all they want to about how no one can change, but they can't fool me. I see it and I work with it, and it's real.
One last problem we see with same-sex marriage is simply a question. Is it really marriage?
In Christianity, we could never say that there is such a thing as same-sex marriage because we only have one definition of marriage, and that's between a man and a woman.
From the word go, human sexuality is meant to be diversity in service to unity. The two become one.
So same-sex marriage is a contradiction in terms, because marriage, according to the Judeo-Christian understanding, is two people who are other coming together into a union, and their very otherness causes a bond to happen.
The primary purpose of marriage is still, no matter how many times they want to deny it and curse it, the primary purpose of marriage is still the propagation, the procreation of the human race.
Thank you for watching this sobering presentation about the realities associated with same-sex marriage. For the Family Research Council here in Washington, D.C., I'm Tony Perkins.